If you don't listen to me, we're getting a divorce. I'd rather divorce a husband who says such selfish things," I declared, my voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and resolve. He shot me a smug smile, unaware of what was about to unfold. "My name is Emily. I'm 35 and have been married for 5 years, living just with my husband. Although I've longed for children, we haven't been blessed yet. We discussed fertility treatments, but in the end, my husband was against them. He believed in leaving things to nature. If we can't have children, it's still a life worth living, just the two of us," he said once, easing my mind, at least for a while. After we got married, both of my husband's parents passed away one after the other, leaving us no time to think about treatments. My husband is quite dominant, a trait that showed even more after we were married. At work, where he was once my senior, he would call me his foolish wife in front of relatives and scold me harshly for the smallest mistakes. It was a continuation of the power dynamic we had before marriage, one I had hoped would soften over time, but it didn't. It might sound like my husband is heartless, but he wasn't always like this. When I worked under him, he gave me good advice, guiding me when I stumbled. He also appreciated my efforts, and when my beloved grandfather passed away, it was my husband who comforted me. It was during those difficult days that we began dating, and eventually, we got married. After the wedding, I left my job and became a full-time housewife. Every evening is the same. "Hey, Emily, I'm home," he calls out, coming through the door well past 9 p.m. He's always late, his managerial position keeping him in the office with overtime hours. "Welcome home," I respond with a smile, though inside I feel the weight of the routine. He doesn't respond much, just heads straight to the sofa, taking off his shirt and socks. I gather them up as I ask, "You're late again tonight. You must be exhausted," but he says nothing, just sits there, silent as always. He must be really tired, I tell myself, convincing my heart that this is just how things are. I prepare dinner, and when it's ready, he eats quickly, still not saying a word. Once he's done, in about 10 minutes, he heads to the bathroom. I lay out a towel and fresh clothes for him, clean up the dishes, and when he comes out of the bath, he heads directly to bed. My husband has always been a man of few words, but lately those few words feel like they're disappearing entirely. But I wonder if my husband's recent promotion has been wearing him down. For the past year, our conversations have become fewer and fewer, yet despite the silence between us, I still trust and love him. He stood by me during my most difficult moments, and that's something I will never forget. I lost my father when I was in middle school, and just a few years later, during my freshman year of high school, my mother passed away too. After that, my grandfather took me in and raised me as if I were his own daughter. He was warm, kind, and I adored him deeply. My goal was to repay him for everything he did for me. When I began working, I saved up as much as I could to take him on trips and share special meals together. Those memories are some of the happiest of my life. I wish he could stay healthy and energetic forever. But just 3 years after I started working, my grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer. He passed away soon after, and I was left completely alone. I knew eventually we would part ways, but it happened too soon. There were so many more things I wanted to do for him, more time I wish we could have shared. His death left me heartbroken, and I spent many nights crying myself to sleep. The person who noticed my sorrow was my boss at the time, now my husband. He listened to me with genuine care, telling me, "You've been through so much, and you did well." For a man who was usually stern and intimidating at work, he showed me such tenderness when I needed it most. I was incredibly lucky to have him as my boss back then, and it was during those moments I saw the kindness in him. I know, deep down, he's a good man. That's why, despite everything, I still want to be the kind of wife who supports him. One afternoon on my day off, the house phone rang. "Hello," I answered. "Hey, Emily, it's me," came the voice of my husband's younger brother. "Oh, long time no see. What's up?" "I need to talk to my brother. Is he around?" "Sure. Hold on a second." I called out to my husband, who was lounging in the living room. "You have a phone call," I said, but as usual, there was no response. Without a word, he stood up and took the phone. "Hello. Hey, how are you? What's going on?" His face, which had been expressionless just moments ago, lit up with a smile as he talked to his brother. My brother-in-law is 15 years younger than my husband, and perhaps because of the large age gap, my husband dotes on him endlessly. I had heard that my brother-in-law was living a blissful life with his beautiful wife, whom he married 2 years ago, so I was surprised when my husband's tone suddenly shifted. Ah, really? Are you okay? His voice became serious. I wondered what was happening on the other end of the line. Well, if you're ever in trouble, just let me know, okay? I'm your big brother after all, he added before hanging up the phone. What happened? Is something wrong? I asked, sensing the weight of the conversation. My brother, he's been laid off, my husband replied, looking downcast. What? Laid off? I was shocked. I never imagined something like that happening to him. Yeah, I heard his company was struggling, but I didn't expect him to actually lose his job. My husband sank into a chair, clearly upset. I was just as shaken. My brother-in-law is so different from my husband. He's gentle, calm, and always respectful. He treats me kindly, often defending me when my husband makes harsh comments in front of our relatives. He'd say, "Bro, that's not fair," to Emily, and never hesitates to apologize for his brother's rudeness. His wife is much like him, kind and thoughtful, and I had always admired them as a couple. Now, knowing he'd been laid off, I felt a growing desire to help. I wanted to support them, even if in some small way. Hey, isn't there something we can do to help? I asked my husband. He shot me a sharp look. What do you mean by that? Well, I hesitated. Maybe we can do something to make your brother feel a little better. I just thought. Before I could finish, my husband let out a heavy sigh. You really are hopeless. You don't understand anything about the real world, do you? You haven't been out there. He's going through the toughest time of his life right now, and you think some casual gesture from us will fix it. Outsiders should stay quiet. His words stung, and I was taken aback by the aggression in his tone. I had only wanted to help, but clearly, I had upset him. Outsider, I asked, almost pleading. Aren't I part of this family too? Family, he sneered. You're my wife, not my brother's family. You're an unrelated outsider. His words felt like a knife to the heart. I had never seen him this cold before. His brother's situation must have deeply affected him, but there were lines he crossed that shouldn't have been. Just don't do anything unnecessary, he snapped before storming out the door. From that moment on, he became even more oppressive toward me. Every little thing I did was met with criticism. What's with this meal? You should learn from my brother's wife. Or, what did you do all day? My brother's wife manages to keep herself tidy and run the household perfectly. His words weighed on me, and our home, once a quiet sanctuary, became a place where I felt like an outsider. He barked at me, his voice sharp and unreasonable. I had never seen him like this before. Enough. What on earth has happened to you? I finally snapped back at my husband. Shut up. Everything's a mess because of you, he blurted out, making no sense. I didn't even know where to start with him. Soon, we weren't even making eye contact, and the gap between us grew wider each day. I began to question our relationship. One morning, he started sorting through our belongings as if undertaking a thorough cleaning. He separated items into necessary and unnecessary, steadily filling garbage bags. I wondered what he was up to, but our relationship had become so cold that I didn't have the energy to ask. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke to me. Hey, what are you doing? You should start packing too, he said. Packing? For what? I asked, puzzled. We're moving out. I'm giving this house to my brother and his wife. What? What are you talking about? I was shocked to discover that he intended to give our home to his unemployed and struggling brother and sister-in-law. Wait a minute. Why are you doing this all of a sudden? Shut up. Don't defy me, he shouted, but I didn't back down. You said you wanted to do something for your brother, didn't you? I reminded him. That's a completely different issue. What are we supposed to do if we hand over the house? Where are we going to live? We'll figure that out later. My brother's in trouble right now, and as his elder brother, I need to help him. He was steering the conversation entirely on his own terms. To begin with, my brother-in-law was not the kind of person who would kick us out and move into someone else's house so brazenly. So why was this happening? As I gave my husband a suspicious look, he handed me something. If all you're going to do is talk back, you're of no use to me anymore. We're getting a divorce? Get out of here right now. He threw divorce papers at me, already filled out. I couldn't believe he was proposing divorce. Stunned by his unexpected move, I could only stand there. And yet, it felt strangely appropriate. I didn't feel like we could continue as a couple even if we stayed together. Maybe this is a good opportunity. I picked up the divorce papers that had fallen to the floor and without saying a word, signed them. My husband watched me with a smug, triumphant smile, his expression so ridiculous that I almost laughed. After finishing, I turned to him and said, "This house isn't yours, is it?" "Huh?" he muttered, confused. "This house is the one I lived in with my grandfather, and the land belonged to him too. They were both passed down to me, remember?" I said calmly. Now it was his turn to be stunned. "If the house is in my name, how exactly are you planning to hand it over?" I pressed, watching him scramble for words. No, I mean," he stammered, clearly flustered. "Did you forget?" I continued. "You moved into my house before we got married because you thought paying rent was a waste. I've been covering the property taxes on this house and land every year since they're in my name. You haven't contributed a penny." "Ah, well," he mumbled, realizing how cornered he was. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said coolly. "Once these papers are filed, our divorce will be finalized and we'll be strangers." Wait a minute. Let's calm down," he pleaded, his arrogance fading. "Calm down," I shot back. "That's my line. You're the one who threw divorce papers in my face like they meant nothing. How selfish can you be?" It's unbelievable. I couldn't hold back anymore. All the frustrations I had bottled up over the years came pouring out. I had loved this man, believed he loved me too. But maybe I had been wrong all along. I never thought our marriage would end like this. "Emily, wait, this is a misunderstanding. Let's talk," he begged. "Talk about what?" I said, my voice firm. "You were the one who brought up divorce first, weren't you?" "I've had enough." I carefully tucked away the signed divorce papers. "It's a holiday today, but I'll submit them first thing tomorrow morning." My husband sank to the floor, dazed. "No, this can't be happening," he muttered. I looked at him coldly without a shred of sympathy. "This is my house. Please leave immediately. Once the papers are filed, we'll be strangers, and I can't live under the same roof as a stranger." He grumbled and pleaded as he gathered his things, but I didn't waver. To me, he was already a stranger, and I felt no need to show him any mercy. Even when he cried and clung to me, it didn't stir a single emotion. Eventually, my husband left, resigned to his fate. Word of our divorce spread quickly at his company. He was immediately looked down upon at work. I heard rumors that the details of our split, and the way he treated me throughout our marriage, had spread widely. It seemed he had entirely lost his place there too. I couldn't help but wonder who started and spread the rumors. All I did was answer the questions his colleagues and subordinates asked me, nothing more. Then about 6 months after our divorce, I ran into someone I'd rather have avoided, my ex-husband. I had just left the real estate agency when I noticed him. It seemed he had been waiting, lying in wait for me to come out. The whole situation was unsettling, and even when I tried to ignore him, he persisted, following me until I finally lost my patience. "Enough. If you have something to say, just say it quickly," I snapped. "Emily, I've always despised you," he declared, leaving me completely baffled. Apparently, in his mind, he had been blaming me for everything, including his brother's layoff. "What? Why would that be my fault?" I asked, incredulous. "Ever since we got married, bad things just kept happening," he insisted. It was true that after our marriage, there were some unfortunate events, like his parents passing away and his injury, but his father had already been hospitalized long before we wed, and his mother had always been frail. As for his injury, that had been his own doing. He tripped over a curb while drunk and broke his wrist. But somehow, he had twisted these events into blaming me for all of it. "So, you think I was the cause of all your misfortunes, and that's why you hated me?" I asked, exasperated. I had always thought he was just a bit awkward, but to hear that he had secretly despised me was beyond frustrating. It was clear he never took responsibility for anything in his life, always blaming others for his troubles. I couldn't believe this was the same man who had once been a reliable supervisor at his company. I pitied his subordinates, imagining how they must have suffered under his leadership, unjustly criticized for things they hadn't done. It was pitiful that I had been married to someone like this. "And yet, even after divorcing me, bad things keep happening to you?" I asked. At my question, he rolled up his sleeves, revealing painful-looking burns. "My apartment burned down 3 months ago," he said, "but that's not all. I lost my wallet, I'm making mistakes at work, and now my brother is acting cold toward me. He hasn't contacted me in weeks." So, even after our divorce, his streak of misfortunes had continued. Unsurprisingly, I felt no sympathy for him. These were all consequences of his own actions, and I had nothing to do with them. "Please, Emily, come back to me. I can't do this without you," he begged. "We were together for so long, weren't we? Didn't I take care of things when you were working? And didn't I help you so much when your grandfather passed away?" Hearing him try to guilt-trip me sent a chill down my spine. I had never felt so detached from him. "All your misfortunes are because of your own actions. Maybe it's time you took a good look at yourself and stopped blaming everyone else for everything," I said, my voice cold and resolute. I turned and walked away from him, ignoring his desperate calls. "Emily, wait, Emily." My ex-husband's voice faded as I disappeared into the crowd, pretending I didn't hear him. A week after our divorce, I got a call from my former brother-in-law. "Emily, well, you're not my sister-in-law anymore, I guess. Sorry to bother you, but it's about my brother." He went on to explain that the decision to give up the house had been entirely my ex-husband's. Neither he nor his wife had any idea about it. "My brother's always been prideful, and it's worried me for a long time. The way he treated you was awful. My wife and I felt terrible watching it all." He paused, then added, "I don't know if it's okay to say this, but I think it's good you divorced him. You deserve to be happy, Emily." "Thank you," I replied, touched by his words. He then told me that he had found a job shortly after the layoff and was managing to get by. I was genuinely happy for him. He mentioned he was thinking of distancing himself from his brother. It seemed my former brother-in-law had his own complicated feelings about the situation and intended to cut ties with my ex-husband. That explained why my ex-husband couldn't reach him. He was being slowly shut out of his own brother's life. Now, divorced and estranged from the brother he adored, my ex-husband was truly alone. I hoped he would realize the weight of his mistakes, but that was no longer my concern. My priority was to disappear from his life completely. The day I ran into him again, I had just signed a contract with a real estate agent to rent out the house I inherited from my grandfather. The house was too big for me to live in alone, but I couldn't bear to let go of all the memories I shared with my grandfather there. I preferred the idea of someone else living in it, someone who would appreciate the space as much as I did. I was ready to move on with my life. I changed my phone number, find a new place to live, and cut off all ties with my ex-husband. At 35, I knew I still had a long life ahead of me, and I was determined to live it on my own terms.
Our family home was a modest 2-story building tucked away on Elm Street. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I lived there with my younger brother Mike, and it was filled with memories of our parents who had long passed away. I often found myself reflecting on those earlier days when it was the 4 of us laughing around the dinner table. After their passing, Mike and I held each other up, leaning on one another for support. Our relationship was more than that of siblings. We were each other's confidants, best friends. I worked at a large company downtown, and Mike was pursuing his studies at the local college. Our evenings often consisted of shared meals and long conversations. It was a simple life, but we were content. One evening, while preparing dinner, Mike enthusiastically told me about his plans for the weekend. "Jane, you should come with me to the game on Saturday," he urged, his eyes twinkling. I smiled, stirring the sauce. "You know, sports aren't my thing, but I'll be cheering you on from here." He laughed, coming over to taste the sauce. Delicious as always. Seriously though, you need to get out more. Have some fun." "I have plenty of fun with you and my books," I replied, giving him a playful nudge. He wrapped his arms around me in a warm hug. "I just want you to be happy, sis." "I am happy, Mike," I assured him, feeling a pang of gratitude for having him in my life. "As long as we have each other, I'm happy." We continued our dinner, chatting about everything from his classes to my work, our dreams, and our future. Those were the moments I cherished the most. The connection we shared felt unbreakable, sacred even. I believed nothing could come between us. As the months went on, we settled into our routines, comfortable in our shared existence. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and our quiet life was about to be disrupted. Little did I know that a chance encounter at a cafe downtown would change everything. Mike was about to meet Sarah, and our lives would never be the same again. That night, I noticed a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He talked about the amazing girl he'd met, his words filled with excitement and anticipation. I listened, happy for him but also sensing that a chapter in our lives was closing. The balance was shifting, and I felt a strange twinge in my gut. But I pushed it aside, choosing to be supportive. After all, family sticks together and nothing could ever change that. Or so I thought. The news of Mike's newfound love interest didn't surprise me. He was a charming young man, full of life and charisma. But as the weeks went by, his relationship with Sarah blossomed at a speed that left me feeling uneasy. One evening, he brought her home for dinner. I wanted to make a good impression, so I prepared a special meal and dressed up a bit. After all, this was a significant moment in my brother's life. Sarah was attractive, with striking eyes and a confident smile. Her laughter filled our dining room, and she seemed to command attention effortlessly. Mike was clearly smitten. "Dinner is fantastic, Jane," Sarah complimented, looking at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must spend a lot of time in the kitchen." I forced a smile, feeling the sting of her veiled insult. "I enjoy cooking. It's a way for me to relax after work." "Oh, I could never waste my time on such things," she replied, glancing at Mike with a knowing look. "But it's charming that you do." Mike seemed oblivious to the barb and chimed in, "Jane's the best cook. We're lucky to have her." As the dinner wore on, Sarah's comments grew more pointed, each one a thinly veiled criticism of my life, my job, or my appearance. I tried to shrug them off, telling myself that she was nervous, trying to make her mark, but something in her demeanor told me otherwise. Mike was blind to it all, caught in the glow of new love. He laughed at her jokes, even when they were at my expense. His lack of awareness hurt, but I held my tongue, hoping that things would get better. They didn't. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah became a regular fixture in our lives. Her insults grew bolder, her jabs more frequent. Mike continued to defend her, often telling me that I was overreacting or that I needed to lighten up. "Come on, Jane," he'd say, trying to placate me after a particularly nasty remark from Sarah. "She's just teasing. You know how girls are." "But it's constant, Mike," I'd argue, frustration welling up. He'd shake his head, his expression filled with confusion. "You just need to get to know her better." "You'll see she's a great person." But I didn't see it. All I saw was a woman who was driving a wedge between my brother and me, turning him against me with her words and her influence. I wasn't going to put up with it, but my attempts to talk to Mike were met with resistance. He was too wrapped up in his newfound love to see what was happening. Sarah's arrival had changed everything. Our once close, knit family was unraveling, and I felt a growing sense of dread. My brother was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I knew that I had to take a stand, but I was afraid of losing Mike. I was caught between my love for my brother and my growing resentment towards Sarah. The storm was brewing, and I could feel it in my bones. But I had no idea just how devastating it would be. Our lives were about to be changed forever, and there was no going back. The wedding was fast approaching, and the house was filled with the hustle and bustle of preparations. Sarah had become more brazen in her treatment of me, and Mike was more and more distant, wrapped up in the whirlwind of his new life. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The day before the wedding, everything changed. I had left work earlier than usual, feeling a strange urge to be home. The house was unusually quiet when I walked in, an eerie silence that set my nerves on edge. As I made my way upstairs, I heard it, a soft moan followed by a stifled giggle. My heart began to pound and a cold fear crept over me. The sounds were coming from Mike's room. I hesitated for a moment, torn between the need to know and the fear of what I might discover. Then, steeling myself, I walked to the door and opened it. The sight that met my eyes will forever be etched in my mind. Mike, lying on the bed with a girl I'd never seen before, a look of shock and guilt on his face. I felt my knees go weak, and a scream of disbelief caught in my throat. "Jane," Mike stammered, jumping up. "It's not what it looks like." "Please, let me explain." "Explain," I yelled, tears of betrayal welling in my eyes. "Explain what, Mike? How could you do this to Sarah, to me?" "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," he pleaded, his face pale. "It was a mistake. It means nothing." "Nothing," I sobbed, my voice breaking. "How can you say that? How can you destroy everything like this?" "I'm so sorry, Jane," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "Please don't tell Sarah. Please. It'll ruin everything." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw desperation I'd never seen before. A part of me wanted to hurt him as he had hurt me, to tell Sarah and watch his world crumble. But another part, the part that loved him and remembered the bond we once shared, knew that I couldn't. "Promise me," he begged, grabbing my hands. "Promise me you won't tell her." I looked into his eyes, searching for the brother I once knew, and finally nodded. "I promise," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "But you've broken something, Mike, something that can never be repaired." I left the room, feeling a weight settle on my shoulders. The secret I now carried was a heavy one, and I knew that it would change everything. The wedding preparations continued, but I moved through them like a ghost, the joy and excitement replaced by a hollow emptiness. Sarah's taunts and jabs were like distant echoes, barely touching me. I had seen the truth, and it had changed everything. That night, as I lay in bed, the reality of what had happened settled in. My brother, my best friend, had betrayed not only his fiancée, but me. The trust we had built over the years was shattered, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had made a promise, but it was a promise that came with a price that I was only just beginning to understand. The dark discovery had cast a shadow over our lives, and I knew that it would never truly go away. The wedding was tomorrow, and I was filled with a sense of dread. What had once been a celebration of love and joy had become a twisted masquerade, and I was trapped, caught in a web of lies and betrayal, with no way out. The dark discovery had changed everything, and there was no going back. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, but the beauty of the day was lost on me. I moved through the preparations in a daze, haunted by what I had discovered and burdened by the promise I had made to Mike. Sarah was in high spirits, her excitement palpable. She flitted from room to room, her laughter ringing through the house, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. "Jane, dear, do make sure the flowers are arranged just so," she commanded, her tone dripping with condescension. "We wouldn't want anything less than perfection, would we?" I bit back a sharp retort, forcing a smile. She flashed me a patronizing smile and moved on, leaving me to my thoughts. How could she not see the truth? How could she be so blind to the deceit and betrayal that lay beneath the surface of this so-called celebration? The ceremony was beautiful, filled with music and poetry, love and promises. But it all rang hollow to me. I watched as Mike and Sarah exchanged vows, their eyes locked, their words full of passion and conviction. And all I could think about was the lie that lay at the heart of it all. The reception followed, a grand affair with music, dancing, and endless toasts to the happy couple. Mike was the picture of joy, his guilt seemingly forgotten as he reveled in his new life. During a quiet moment, he pulled me aside, his eyes searching mine. "Thank you, Jane," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you for keeping my secret." I know it wasn't easy. I looked at him, my heart heavy. "You're my brother, Mike. I love you. But what you did was wrong. Don't ever forget that." He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know. And I'll make it up to you. I promise. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could move past this and find our way back to each other. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same again. As the evening wore on, I found myself becoming more and more detached, watching the revelry with a sense of detachment. I felt like an outsider in my own life, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Finally, the night drew to a close, and the guests began to depart, leaving behind a trail of laughter and well wishes. I stood by the door, saying my goodbyes, feeling a growing sense of relief that the day was finally over. As the last guest left, Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold. "Well, Jane, I hope you enjoyed yourself. But remember, this is my home now, and things will be done my way." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "This is our home, Sarah. Mike's and mine, and I won't be pushed aside." She laughed, a cruel sound. "We'll see about that, dear sister-in-law. We'll see." I watched her walk away, a chill running down my spine. The battle lines were drawn, and I knew that this was only the beginning. The wedding was over, but the war had just begun. A war that would test the bonds of family, of love, of trust. A war that would reveal the true nature of the people I thought I knew. And I knew that I had to be ready. Ready to fight for what was right, for what was mine. Ready to face the darkness and emerge on the other side. The wedding had changed everything, and there was no turning back. The storm was coming, and I had to be ready to face it. Whatever the cost, life after the wedding became a daily struggle. Sarah's bullying escalated, her insults and taunts becoming more personal and vicious. Mike seemed oblivious to it all, lost in his own world, content to ignore the growing tension in the house. I tried to hold on to my patience, to rise above her cruelty, but it was wearing me down. Every day was a battle, a fight to maintain my dignity and self-respect. The home that had once been my sanctuary had become a battlefield, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. One day, Sarah's taunting reached a new level of malice. "Really, Jane, you must try harder with your appearance," she sneered as I entered the kitchen. "Your drab clothing and plain looks are becoming quite tiresome." I gritted my teeth, forcing a smile. "I'm quite comfortable with who I am, Sarah, but thank you for your concern." "Oh, don't pretend you don't care," she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "You're just jealous of what I have with Mike. You're nothing but a burden to him." "That's enough, Sarah," I snapped, my anger finally boiling over. "I won't stand here and be insulted in my own home." "Your home," she laughed, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is my home now, and you're just a guest. A very unwelcome guest." Mike walked in at that moment, his face lighting up when he saw Sarah. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes darting between us. "Your sister is being insufferable, as usual," Sarah pouted, playing the victim. "She doesn't understand her place in this house." Mike turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Jane, can't you just try to get along with Sarah, for my sake?" I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "For your sake." "What about me, Mike? What about what she's doing to me? How can you just stand there and let her treat me this way?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. Can't you see how much I love her? Can't you just let me be happy?" I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if my heart was breaking. "I'm your sister, Mike. I've always been there for you, supported you, loved you. And this is how you repay me, by allowing her to treat me like this." He looked down, his face flushed with shame. "I'm sorry, Jane. I didn't mean to hurt you. But she's my wife now, and I have to stand by her. Even if it means losing me?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer, and I knew that I had my answer. That was the breaking point. The moment when I knew that I had lost my brother, lost my home, lost everything that had once meant so much to me. I packed my bags that night, tears streaming down my face as I realized the enormity of what had happened. I was leaving behind my past, my family, my life. As I left the house, Mike stood at the door, his face pale, his eyes filled with regret. "Jane, please don't go." "I'm so sorry." I looked at him, my heart aching. "I love you, Mike. But you've made your choice, and now I have to make mine." I walked away, my steps heavy, my soul shattered. The breaking point had come, and there was no going back. My life had changed in an instant, and I knew that I had to find the strength to move on, to rebuild, to find my own path. But no matter how far I went, I knew that the pain, the betrayal, the loss would always be with me. The breaking point had changed everything, and I was left to pick up the pieces, alone and adrift, searching for a way to heal. In the days following my departure, anger festered within me. The pain of betrayal was raw, and I knew that I couldn't simply walk away without some form of closure. I needed to make them understand the magnitude of their actions, the depth of their deceit. Revenge, once a foreign concept to me, now seemed the only path to healing. I found a small apartment and immersed myself in work, my mind constantly replaying the events that had led me here. The taunts, the lies, the abandonment. They all fueled a fire within me, a fire that demanded justice. The day of my revenge arrived, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I invited Sarah and Mike to dinner, a final farewell, a chance to make amends. They accepted, their curiosity piqued, no doubt expecting me to beg for forgiveness or plead for reconciliation. They arrived at my apartment, Sarah dressed to the nines, her eyes assessing everything with a critical eye. Mike looked uncomfortable, his eyes avoiding mine, a hint of guilt in his expression. "Jane, this place is quaint," Sarah said, her voice dripping with condescension. I smiled, my voice steady. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm quite happy here." We sat down to dinner, the atmosphere tense, the conversation stilted. Finally, as the main course was served, I looked at them, my eyes filled with determination. "Mike, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my heart pounding in my chest. "Something you both need to know." Sarah's eyes narrowed, sensing that something was amiss. "What's this all about, Jane?" I took a deep breath, my voice firm. "It's about the truth, Sarah. The truth about what you both have done. The truth about the lies and the betrayal." Mike's face went pale, his eyes widening in shock. "Jane, what are you talking about?" I looked at him, my voice filled with scorn. "Don't play dumb, Mike. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You were cheating on Sarah before the wedding, and I caught you." Sarah's face went white, her eyes filled with disbelief. "What? Is this true, Mike?" Mike looked at her, his face filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Sarah. It's true, but it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." Sarah's face twisted with rage, her voice rising. "A mistake? How dare you? And you, Jane, you knew about this and said nothing." I met her gaze, my voice cold. "Why should I have said anything? You treated me like trash, bullied me, drove me from my own home. You both made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences." Sarah's face crumpled, tears in her eyes. "I cheated on you too, Mike. I never wanted you. I just wanted your money." Mike's face went ashen, his eyes filled with shock and disbelief. "What? Sarah, how could you?" I watched them, my heart pounding, my revenge complete. The truth was out, and they were left to deal with the fallout. "I'm done with both of you," I said, my voice filled with finality. "You've shown me who you truly are, and I want nothing more to do with you. Goodbye." I walked away, leaving them in stunned silence, the weight of their betrayal hanging heavy in the air. My revenge was unleashed, and I felt a sense of satisfaction, a sense of justice. But as the days wore on, the emptiness remained, the pain still raw. Weeks turned into months, and the dust began to settle. My revenge, while satisfying at the moment, had not brought the peace I had hoped for. The anger and betrayal still gnawed at me, but a small voice within urged me to move on, to find a new path, to rebuild. I threw myself into my work and began to explore new interests. The world seemed full of possibilities, and I was determined to make the most of it. Slowly, I began to heal, to find joy in life.
I'm Emma, and this is where my story begins. I was a woman in love, filled with the dreams and hopes that come with marrying the person I believed to be the love of my life. The wedding was an affair to remember, filled with laughter, love, and promises of a shared future. My husband, whom I'll call James for the sake of this story, was a charming man, full of charisma and wit. We met at college, and it didn't take long for us to fall deeply in love. "Emma, do you believe in fate?" he once asked me, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I believe in us, James. That's all the fate I need," I replied, my heart swelling with affection. We both dreamed of a life filled with joy, children, and a beautiful home where we could grow old together. Those dreams seemed so achievable as we danced our first dance as a married couple. "Emma, I promise to love you every day, in every way, for the rest of our lives," James whispered into my ear as we swayed to our favorite song. "I'll hold you to that promise, my love," I answered, a playful smile on my face. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of joy and planning for the future. James was a dreamer, always looking for the next big adventure, while I was the practical one, grounded and determined to build a stable life for our family. We found the perfect house, a place that we could call our own. "Can you imagine raising our children here, Emma? This house is meant to be ours," he exclaimed as we toured the place. "It's beautiful, James, but it's expensive. Can we handle such a large loan?" I questioned, my pragmatic side taking over. "Trust me, Emma, we'll make it work. You and I can conquer the world together," he assured me, his eyes full of conviction. We took out a $1.03 million loan, a sum that was both thrilling and terrifying. I believed in us, in our ability to make our dreams come true. "Here's to our new beginning, Emma," James toasted on the night we moved in. "To us and our forever," I replied, clinking glasses and feeling that everything was falling into place. But as time would reveal, forever can be an elusive thing, and dreams can sometimes turn into nightmares. Our beautiful beginning was just the first chapter in a story that would take turns I never could have anticipated. It was a time of innocence and love, a time before the shadows crept in, and the man I loved became a stranger. Little did I know, the decisions we made in those early days would set the stage for a battle I never saw coming. But in that moment, as we embarked on our new life together, everything felt perfect and the future seemed full of endless possibilities. Life in our new home was a dream come true. The spacious rooms, the lovely garden, and the promise of the life we were building together made every day a joy. I found myself spending more time at work, driven by the determination to pay off the loan. James, on the other hand, was struggling in his career, often coming home, frustrated and demotivated. "James, maybe you should look for another job, something that suits you better," I suggested one evening, concern etching my voice. "Emma, I don't know. I thought this was my calling. Maybe I'm just not good at anything," he replied, a hint of defeat in his eyes. "Don't talk like that. You're amazing and you'll find your way. We're in this together," I reassured him, trying to lift his spirits. As time went by, I became pregnant with our daughter, Lucy. The joy of expecting our first child overshadowed any concerns we had. James's excitement was contagious, and we spent hours talking about our hopes and dreams for our little one. "Emma, she's going to be as smart and beautiful as her mother. I can't wait to meet her," James said, his hand resting on my growing belly. "I hope she has your sense of humor and kindness, James," I replied, smiling at the love and anticipation in his eyes. Lucy's birth was a turning point in our lives. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I realized that everything I'd worked for was worth it. Our family was complete, and I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. "James, look at her! She's perfect! We're family now," I whispered, tears of joy in my eyes. "We made her, Emma. We made this beautiful little girl. I love you more than ever," James responded, his voice choked with emotion. The following years were filled with the ordinary magic of raising a child. Lucy's laughter filled our home, and our love for her grew with each passing day. But underneath the surface, tensions were brewing. The weight of the loan hung over us, and my contributions overshadowed James's minimal financial support. I sensed a growing resentment in him, but I pushed it aside, focusing on our family. "Emma, do you ever feel like all we do is work and pay bills?" James asked one night, a faraway look in his eyes. "We're building a future, James. It's hard now, but it'll be worth it in the end. We're doing this for Lucy, for us," I said, trying to keep the faith. "We are, aren't we?" he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. As I worked tirelessly to pay off the loan, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was changing in James. His once vibrant spirit seemed dulled, and the spark in his eyes was fading. Our beautiful life was still intact, but cracks were beginning to appear. I chose to ignore them, focusing instead on our achievements and the love we shared. But in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that the life we were building was on shaky ground, and I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Life has a way of sneaking up on you. Just when you think you've got everything figured out, it throws a curveball, and the world you've built begins to crumble. That's what happened to James and me. It started subtly. James became distant, often lost in thought. He began to come home late from work, sometimes reeking of alcohol. "James, where were you? Dinner's been ready for hours," I asked one night, concern and frustration mingling in my voice. "I was out with some friends, Emma. Can't a man have a little fun?" he snapped back, his tone harsh and unrecognizable. "But we had plans tonight. Remember, Lucy's school play." He waved me away, muttering an apology that didn't reach his eyes. That was the first of many broken promises and missed commitments. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a place of tension and unspoken resentment. Days turned into weeks, and James's behavior became more erratic. The man I had married, the man who had promised to love me forever, was slipping away. "James, what's going on? Talk to me, please," I begged one night, tears in my eyes. "Nothing's going on, Emma. Why do you keep asking?" "I'm fine," he yelled, his eyes cold and distant. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Was it stress from work? Was he unhappy with our life? I racked my brains, trying to figure out what had changed, but I kept coming up empty. Lucy noticed it too. My sweet, sensitive daughter became withdrawn, picking up on the tension between her parents. "Mommy, why is Daddy always so angry?" she asked one day, her big eyes filled with confusion and worry. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to figure out. But we still love each other very much," I reassured her, though I was far from certain myself. The coldness in our home was palpable, like a chilling wind that had settled over us. The love and trust we had built seemed to be eroding, replaced by anger, confusion, and a growing sense of despair. I tried to talk to James, to reach out and understand what was happening, but he shut me out at every turn. "James, we need to talk about this. We can't go on like this. What's happening to us?" I pleaded one night, desperate to break through his icy facade. "There's nothing to talk about, Emma. Just leave me alone," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I felt a pang of fear and a growing sense of loss. Who was this man I had married? Where was the loving, caring partner I had once known? Our marriage was unraveling, and I felt powerless to stop it. The walls were closing in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As the months wore on, James's behavior became more unpredictable. He was like a stranger in our home, his coldness and indifference a constant reminder of how far we had fallen. I clung to the memories of our happy past, but they seemed like a distant dream, a cruel reminder of what we had lost. In my heart, I knew that our story was taking a dark turn, and I braced myself for the storm I knew was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited us. The love and trust we had built were about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable, and I would be left to pick up the pieces of our broken lives. The change in James was no longer something I could ignore or explain away. His late nights, his coldness, and his growing disdain for our family life gnawed at my heart. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I never could have imagined the horrifying truth. One evening, as I was putting Lucy to bed, the door slammed, and I heard James's voice, slurred and loud, from the doorstep. "Emma, where are you?" "Come meet my new friend," he shouted, his words tinged with a drunken arrogance I had never heard before. My heart pounded as I walked towards the front door, Lucy's worried eyes following me. "Mommy, is Daddy okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart. Stay here," I replied, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. As I opened the door, I was met with a sight that will forever be etched in my mind. James stood there, swaying slightly, his arm draped around a young woman I had never seen before. Her eyes were wild, her laughter shrill and out of place. "Emma, meet my new wife. You finally paid off the loan, and now I can live here with her. I want a divorce," he spat, his words a cruel dagger to my heart. "What? James, what are you talking about? This isn't you. Please, let's talk about this," I stammered, disbelief and terror washing over me. The stranger, still laughing, held out the divorce papers, her eyes glinting with malice. "Here you go, Emma. Time to move on," she sneered. My mind reeled, unable to process what was happening. Anger and shock welled up inside me, and without thinking, I grabbed the papers and ripped them to shreds. "You will not do this to me! To Lucy! You're drunk, James! Go to bed and we'll talk in the morning," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. James's face twisted into a snarl, and before I knew what was happening, he lashed out, his fist connecting with my face. I fell to the ground, my head spinning, pain and betrayal overwhelming me. The room went silent, except for the sounds of James and his mistress leaving, their harsh laughter echoing in my ears. I lay there, stunned and broken, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My sweet Lucy, wise beyond her years, came out of her room, her small hands clutching a camera. "Mommy, I captured what happened on camera," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. My heart broke as I looked at my daughter, her innocence shattered by the violence she had witnessed. The man we had loved and trusted had become a monster. "We have to go to the police, Lucy. We have to make this right," I said, determination steeling me against the pain and shock. That night marked the end of my marriage and the beginning of a battle for justice. I knew that our lives would never be the same again. The love and trust that had once been the foundation of our family were gone, replaced by fear, anger, and a thirst for revenge. The morning after the horrifying incident, my face still aching from James's blow, I sat down with Lucy to review the footage she had captured. It was painful to watch, but I knew that it was the key to our fight for justice. "Mommy, will Daddy go to jail?" Lucy asked, her voice small and filled with confusion. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we have to do what's right. We have to make sure no one gets hurt like this again," I answered, my voice catching in my throat. We went to the police station, Lucy's small hand in mine, the weight of the evidence heavy in my heart. The process was cold and clinical, the officers asking questions, taking statements, reviewing the footage. "Mrs. Thompson, this is strong evidence against your husband." "We'll start the investigation immediately," Detective Johnson said, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Thank you, Detective. Please make sure he pays for what he's done," I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation gathered momentum. The evidence Lucy had captured, along with my testimony, was enough to build a strong case against James. "You've done the right thing, Emma," my lawyer, Mrs. Davis, assured me. "This evidence is powerful. He won't get away with this." I hoped she was right, but fear still gnawed at me. What if he got off? What if he came back? I knew that the battle was far from over. I spent my days trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Lucy, but the strain was taking its toll. Friends and family rallied around us, but nothing could erase the pain and betrayal. "Emma, we're here for you, whatever you need, my sister," Sarah told me, her eyes filled with concern. "I know, Sarah, and I appreciate it, but I can't help but feel like everything's falling apart," I replied, my voice breaking. "You're strong, Emma. You'll get through this." "We all believe in you," Sarah said, her words a balm to my wounded soul. The court date was set, and the days leading up to it were a blur of anxiety and preparation. I knew that I had to be strong, to face James and make sure that he was held accountable for his actions. "Mommy, will we be okay?" Lucy asked one night, her eyes filled with worry. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters," I said, holding her close, trying to believe my own words. The trial loomed like a dark cloud, but I knew that I had the evidence on my side. I had the truth, and I was ready to fight for justice, for myself, for Lucy, and for all the women who had been silenced and abused. The day of the trial arrived, and with it, a tumult of emotions. Fear, anger, determination, and a thirst for justice roiled within me as I prepared to face James in court. My lawyer, Mrs. Davis, was a rock of support. "Emma, we've got this. The evidence is strong, and justice will be served," she assured me as we entered the courthouse. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating place, filled with the murmur of lawyers and the expectant gaze of the public. James sat across from me, his face impassive, his lawyer whispering in his ear. I felt a chill run down my spine as our eyes met. The man I had loved was now a stranger, an enemy. "Mrs. Thompson, are you ready?" the judge asked, his voice a calm authority in the chaos of my emotions. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady. The trial began, and the prosecutor laid out the case against James, presenting the evidence with precision and passion. The footage that Lucy had captured played on the screen, a stark, unflinching testament to James's violence and betrayal. "Mrs. Thompson, can you please describe the events leading up to the incident?" the prosecutor asked, her eyes kind and understanding. I knew something was wrong with James, but I never thought he would do something like this," I began, my voice trembling. "He brought a stranger into our home, told me he wanted a divorce, and then he hit me." The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "And your daughter, she captured this on camera," the prosecutor continued. "Yes, she did. She's a brave girl. She knew it was wrong and she wanted to help," I replied, tears welling in my eyes. The defense tried to paint a picture of a troubled marriage, of misunderstandings and provocations. But the evidence was clear, the truth undeniable. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you were controlling, that you drove your husband to this?" James's lawyer asked, his voice slick and accusing. "No, that's not true. I loved him, I trusted him, and he betrayed me," I shot back, anger and indignation rising within me. The trial continued. Witnesses called, testimonies given. But through it all, the evidence stood strong, a beacon of truth in a sea of lies and manipulations. Finally, the jury retired to deliberate, and I was left to wait, the minutes stretching into hours, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. "Emma, whatever happens, you've done the right thing. You've stood up for yourself, for Lucy, for all the women who've been silenced," Mrs. Davis said, her hand on my shoulder. "I know, but I'm so scared," I whispered, tears threatening to spill. "You're strong, Emma. You've got this," she replied, her voice filled with conviction. The jury returned, and as the foreman read the verdict, my breath caught in my throat. "Guilty," he said, the word ringing in my ears. Tears of relief and triumph flowed down my face as the judge handed down the sentence. 5 years in prison for domestic violence and arranged marriages. "Justice has been served, Mrs. Thompson," the judge said, his eyes meeting mine. "Yes, Your Honor, it has," I replied, my voice filled with gratitude and resolve. Justice had been served, the battle won. The evidence had spoken, the truth had prevailed. James would pay for what he had done, and I could begin to rebuild my life, to heal. But the victory was bittersweet. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger, a monster. My family was broken, but we were strong. We had faced the darkness, and we had emerged victorious. As I left the courtroom, Lucy's hand in mine, I knew that we were forever changed. The scars would remain, but so would the strength, the courage, and the knowledge that we had stood tall and fought for justice. We were survivors, warriors, and we would move forward, together, our heads held high, our hearts filled with hope and determination. Justice had been served, and we were free.